Better now. I understand those things that I did not understand before. I must be the one to kill Harry Potter, and I shall be." At these words, seemingly in response to them, a sudden wail sounded, a terrible drawn-out cry of misery and pain. Many of those at the table looked downward, startled, for the sound had seemed to issue from below their feet. "Wormtail," said Voldemort, with no change in his quiet, thoughtful tone, and without removing his eyes from the revolving body above, "have I not spoken to you about keeping our prisoner quiet?" "Yes, my lord," gasped a small man halfway down the table, who had been sitting so low in his chair that it had appeared, at first glance, to be unoccupied. Now he scrambled from his seat and scurried from the room, leaving nothing behind him but a curious gleam of silver. "As I was saying," continued Voldemort, looking again at the tense faces of his followers, "I understand better now. I shall need, for instance, to borrow a wand from one of you before I go to kill Harry Potter." The faces around him displayed nothing but shock. He might have announced that he wanted to borrow one of their arms. "No volunteers?" said Voldemort. "Let's see. Lucius, I see no reason for you to have a wand any more." Lucius Malfoy looked up. His skin appeared yellowish and waxy in the firelight, and his eyes were sunken and shadowed. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse. "My lord?" "Your wand, Lucius. I require your wand." Malfoy glanced sideways at his wife. She was staring straight ahead, quite as pale as he was, but beneath the table, her slim fingers closed briefly on his wrist. At her touch, Malfoy put his hand into his robes, withdrew a wand, and passed it along to Voldemort, who held it up in front of his red eyes, examining it closely. "What is it?" "Elm, my lord," whispered Malfoy. "And the core?" Dragon heartstring." "Good," said Voldemort. He drew out his own wand and compared the lengths. Lucius Malfoy made an involuntary movement. For a fraction of a second, it seemed he expected to receive Voldemort's wand in exchange for his own. The gesture was not missed by Voldemort, whose eyes widened maliciously. "Give you my wand, Lucius?" "My wand?" Some of the throng sniggered. "I have given you your liberty, Lucius. Is that not enough for you? But I have noticed that you and your family seem less than happy of late. What is it about my presence in your home that displeases you, Lucius?" Nothing, my lord." "Such lies, Lucius." The soft voice seemed to hiss on even after the cruel mouth had stopped moving. One or two of the wizards barely repressed a shudder. As the hissing grew louder, something heavy could be heard sliding across the floor beneath the table. The huge snake emerged to climb slowly up Voldemort's chair. It rose seemingly endlessly and came to rest across Voldemort's shoulders, its neck the thickness of a man's thigh, its eyes with their vertical slits for pupils, unblinking. Voldemort stroked the creature absently with long thin fingers, still looking at Lucius Malfoy. "Why do the Malfoys look so unhappy with their lot? Is my return, my rise to power, not the very thing they professed to desire for so many years?" "Of course, my lord," said Lucius Malfoy. His hand shook as he wiped sweat from his upper lip. "We did desire it. We do." To Malfoy's left, his wife made an odd, stiff nod, her eyes averted from Voldemort and the snake. To his right, his son Draco, who had been gazing up at the inert body overhead, glanced quickly at Voldemort and away again, terrified to make eye contact. "My lord," said a dark woman halfway down the table, her voice constricted with emotion, "it is an honor to have you here in our family's house. There can be no higher pleasure." She sat beside her sister, as unlike her in looks with her dark hair and heavily lidded eyes as she was in bearing and demeanor. Where Narcissa sat rigid and impassive, Bellatrix leaned towards Voldemort, for mere words could not demonstrate her longing for closeness. "No higher pleasure," repeated Voldemort, his head tilted a little to one side as he considered Bellatrix. "That means a great deal, Bellatrix, from you. My lord knows I speak nothing but the truth. No higher pleasure, even compared with the happy event that I hear has taken place in your family this week." She stared at him, her lips parted, evidently confused. "I don't know what you mean, my lord. I'm talking about your niece, Bellatrix, and yours, Lucius and Narcissa. She has just married the werewolf, Lupin. You must be so proud." There was an eruption of jeering laughter from around the table. Many leaned forward to exchange gleeful looks. A few thumped their table with their fists. The great snake, disliking the disturbance, opened its mouth wide and hissed angrily, but the Death Eaters did not hear it. So jubilant were they at Bellatrix and the Malfoys' humiliation. Bellatrix's face, so recently flushed with happiness, had turned an ugly, blotchy red. "She is no niece of ours, my lord," she cried over the outpouring of mirth. "We, Narcissa and I, have never set eyes on our sister since she married the mudblood. This brat has nothing to do with either of us, nor any beast she marries." "What say you, Draco?" asked Voldemort, and though his voice was quiet, it carried clearly through the catcalls and jeers. "Will you babysit the cubs?" The hilarity mounted. Draco Malfoy looked in terror at his father, who was staring down into his own lap, then caught his mother's eye. She shook her head almost imperceptibly, then resumed her own deadpan stare at the opposite wall. "Enough," said Voldemort, stroking the angry snake. "Enough." And the laughter died at once. "Many of our oldest family trees become a little diseased over time," he said, as Bellatrix gazed at him, breathless and imploring. "You must prune yours, must you not, to keep it healthy? Cut away those parts that threaten the health of the rest." "Yes, my lord," whispered Bellatrix, and her eyes swam with tears of gratitude again, "at the first chance." "You shall have it," said Voldemort. "And in your family, so in the world, we shall cut away the canker that infects us, until only those of the true blood remain." Voldemort raised Lucius Malfoy's wand, pointed it directly at the slowly revolving figure suspended over the table, and gave it a tiny flick. The figure came to life with a groan and began to struggle against invisible bonds. "Do you recognize our guest, Severus?" asked Voldemort. Snape raised his eyes to the upside-down face. All of the Death Eaters were looking up at the captive now, as though they had been given permission to show curiosity. As she revolved to face the firelight, the woman said in a cracked and terrified voice, "Severus, help me." "Ah, yes," said Snape, as the prisoner turned slowly away again. "And you, Draco?" asked Voldemort, stroking the snake's snout with his one free hand. Draco shook his head jerkily. Now that the woman had woken, he seemed unable to look at her any more. "But you would not have taken her classes," said Voldemort. "For those of you who do not know, we are joined here tonight by Charity Burbage, who, until recently, taught at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." There were small noises of comprehension around the table. A broad, hunched woman with pointed teeth cackled. "Yes, Professor Burbage taught the children of witches and wizards all about muggles, how they are not so different from us." One of the Death Eaters spat on the floor. Charity Burbage revolved to face Snape again. "Severus, please, please." "Silence," said Voldemort, with another twitch of Malfoy's wand, and Charity fell silent as if gagged. Not content with corrupting and polluting the minds of wizarding children, last week Professor Burbage wrote an impassioned defence of mudbloods in the Daily Prophet. "Wizards," she says, "must accept these thieves of their knowledge and magic. The dwindling of the purebloods is," says Professor Burbage, "a most desirable circumstance. She would have us all mate with muggles, or, no doubt, werewolves." Nobody laughed this time. There was no mistaking the anger and contempt in Voldemort's voice. For the third time, Charity Burbage revolved to face Snape. Tears were pouring from her eyes into her hair. Snape looked back at her, quite impassive, as she turned slowly away from him again. "Avada Kedavra." The flash of green light illuminated every corner of the room. Charity fell with a resounding crash onto the table below, which trembled and creaked. Several of the Death Eaters leapt back in their chairs. Draco fell out of his onto the floor. "Dinner, Nagini," said Voldemort softly, and the great snake swayed and slithered from his shoulders onto the polished wood.